Appearing on the Ideas stage today, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Representative Joaquin Castro, Governor Josh Shapiro, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And now please welcome the Atlantic's Candace Montgomery.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the afternoon's Ideas stage. I'm Candace Montgomery, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Atlantic Live, and we are proud to bring the Atlantic's journalism to life at our 15th annual festival. If you are with us this morning, we're happy to have you back. If you're here for the first time, welcome. We have a stellar lineup this afternoon to unpack some of the most consequential issues of our time, like immigration reform and border control, navigating political polarization, and the existential threats to free speech and expression. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our festival underwriters for supporting the Atlantic's journalism. Our presenting level underwriters, Leaps by Bayer, Pfizer, and Southern Company, our supporting underwriter, Allstate, and each of our contributing underwriters, AHIP, Barber, Boston Consulting Group, City of Hope, Eli Lilly and Company, Genentech, Goldman Sachs, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and Visit Seattle. Now, please silence your cell phones, but keep them close by. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the Idea Stage, so please be sure to share a few words on social media using the hashtag TAF23. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Now enjoy the show.
Welcome, Leader Jeffries. What a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be here.
Over to the stage. Last November, you were unanimously elected to serve as the House Democratic leader, and you're also serving your 6th term in Congress representing Brooklyn. And you have the footwear to show it. And following your election as House leader, you said, and I quote, "We will look for common ground with Republicans whenever and wherever possible, but oppose extremism on the other side of the aisle whenever necessary." And that's what you've done, and that's what you're doing. In your career, you've led on diverse issues such as COVID recovery, fighting for social and economic justice, and standing up and protecting creators and artists. But this moment is unlike any other moment. The country is deeply divided. Congress is deeply divided. We're on the verge of a government shutdown again that will impact the daily lives of Americans and undermine faith and confidence in our country around the world. So, Mr. Leader, is there a way out of this mess?
We're diving right in. That's a great question.
We are.
Laurene, I appreciate that. I think the simple way out, and I say this to my Republican colleagues, 3 words: keep your word. That's all they have to do. There was an agreement that was reached. It was bipartisan in nature. It was negotiated by my Republican colleagues in May to avoid the manufactured, potentially catastrophic default crisis. And as part of that agreement, top-line spending numbers were negotiated for this very reason, to avoid another potential crisis that the American people would be asked to unnecessarily shoulder. So those top-line spending numbers were part of the resolution of the default crisis in a bill that was passed by more than 300 members of the House of Representatives, including 149 Republicans, and the entire leadership team on the other side of the aisle, more than 165 or so Democrats, bipartisan numbers in the Senate, signed into law by President Joe Biden. And within a week, my Republican colleagues broke the agreement that they negotiated and demanded much deeper spending cuts than had been agreed to. And it's all part of an effort to do things like cut Social Security, slash public school funding, criminalize abortion care, things that relate to just trying to jam an extreme ideology down the throats of the American people, and we're going to stand up to it. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
But there are also some who believe that your party should do whatever it takes and agree to whatever it takes in order to walk us back from the brink, and that this moment is beyond politics. There are others who believe that this is a mess of the Republicans' making and that the Republicans have a responsibility to solve it because they created it. What do you think? Is this the responsibility of the Democratic Party to fix this?
Well, we do have a general responsibility, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, to continue to try to find common ground with each other, with the other side of the aisle, whenever and wherever possible.
Right.
To get things done, to make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans, to build a healthy economy, to stand up for freedom, to fight for democracy, to find the common ground to advance the ball for the American people. We were sent to Washington not to make an ideological point, but to make a difference in the lives of the American people. Mm-hmm. Often the best way to do that is to partner together whenever and wherever possible. But as you also referenced, we have to stand up against the extremism whenever necessary. And this is an extreme situation. To shut down the government simply to try to extract policy concessions that the extremists know they cannot achieve through the normal legislative process. And so you want to threaten harm on the American people. Initially, it was through a potential default on our debt.
Yep.
Now it's through shutting down the government, which is not a new thing for the other side of the aisle to do. They've done it repeatedly. But it's all part of an effort to basically say to the American people, either we're going to shut the government down and hurt you, or we want you to agree to our extreme ransom note demands. And in this particular instance, I think we have a responsibility to stand up for the American people. And there's a bipartisan bill working its way through the Senate that was advanced by the senators 2 days ago with a vote of 77, I believe, to 19. That's an extraordinary thing in the Senate or in the House at a moment of significant division in the country. It's a bipartisan bill that would continue to fund the government, fund disaster relief, fund the Ukrainian war effort,
Right.
and it doesn't have any of these extreme, policy riders, so to speak, that have nothing to do with funding the government in a way that makes life better for everyday Americans. And so the path forward, that's
Yeah.
bipartisan, is to allow the Senate to do its work over the next day or so, send us this bipartisan bill, if
And that would be tomorrow.
possibly tomorrow, maybe on Saturday. Senate takes a little time, y'all, to work out things. But they're working, and they're working in a
Yep.
bipartisan way. And when it happens, maybe at some point this weekend, hopefully no later than Saturday, then I think House Republicans have a responsibility to put the bill on the floor for an up or down vote. And we will supply the majority of votes, and we will avoid a government shutdown.
So let's just stay on that for a second. So if the speaker brings the CR forward for an up or down vote, are there moderate Republicans that you think would join with the Democrats to vote up?
It certainly would be my hope. The public representations have been amongst some of the Republicans who are in, very tough districts that President Biden won in 2020, the 18 Republicans who fall into that category, including 6 in New York. And it would be my hope and my cautiously optimistic expectation that if the vote is put on the floor for an up or down vote by the members of the House, that there will just be a handful. We only need 6, 8, 10 House Republicans to join us to avoid, an extreme MAGA Republican government shutdown.
Right, and most likely, Speaker McCarthy would be faced with a motion to vacate. How do you feel about that?
Well, we haven't had a discussion about this issue on the House Democratic caucus side, and our position has been, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. What is in front of us right now has got to be, I think, all of our attention focused on avoiding a catastrophic government shutdown. which is entirely unnecessary. Now, if eventually Matt Gaetz or one of the other more extreme members of the House Republican Conference decide to go down this road, then we'll have to have an internal family conversation and kind of try to figure it out.
Like an uncomfortable Thanksgiving.
But there, and I've said this, I have said this publicly, and I've said it directly to the speaker and others. There are trust issues. Mm-hmm. There are trust issues in this relationship because of the fact that the House Republicans demanded, I think y'all remember, basically demanded President Biden has to sit down with us to negotiate. This was on an extraneous issue. Spending has never been part of resolving the default issue because we have a constitutional responsibility to protect the full faith and credit of the United States of America, period, full stop. A default on our debt would have been catastrophic. They insisted that spending be part of the conversation. They insisted. So we have a four corners discussion led, of course, also by the executive. President Biden did a great job, negotiated a bipartisan agreement. It included spending. We weren't too happy about that inclusion. We believed it was extraneous, but we did what was necessary, led by President Biden, to avoid a catastrophic default. Mm-hmm. Negotiated top-line spending numbers for both defense and non-defense discretionary to meet the needs of the American people, and then a week later, they turn around and break the agreement that they negotiated. And so, they're trust issues. They're trust issues. And heading into the 3 weeks of session this month, the opening act is to launch what we view, and I believe the American people overwhelmingly conclude, is an illegitimate impeachment inquiry. Yeah. With zero facts and evidence to support the notion that President Biden broke the law or committed an impeachable offense. This is what you do facing a potentially catastrophic government shutdown. We should be focused on continuing to make progress for the American people, solving problems for hardworking taxpayers, building a healthy economy, dealing with the cost of living issues, fighting for reproductive freedom, doing the things necessary to put people over politics. But you launch an illegitimate impeachment inquiry. We got trust issues. And so at the end of the day, we're focused on avoiding this catastrophic government shutdown, getting to work to reach a year-end spending agreement, and then if a motion to vacate is before us, we're going to have that, I think as you indicated, that Thanksgiving dinner conversation.
One last question, well, a multi-part question. So let's assume that the speaker does not bring the CR onto the floor on Saturday, and a shutdown ensues. How does it end? What does it mean for day-to-day Americans? We had Speaker Emerita Pelosi here earlier, and she was kind of walking through the number of people who will be affected directly, who would not be paid directly. But how does it touch average Americans?
It's such a great question. And by the way, I refer to Nancy Pelosi either as Speaker Emerita or the greatest speaker of all time.
Okay, good.
And so, it doesn't make my job any, and it's hard to follow Michael Jordan, y'all.
Yeah.
But we're doing it as a
just
team
keep
effort.
wearing the shoes.
But, a government shutdown, and it is very serious, would adversely impact the economy, potentially trigger even more interest rate increases, which, have already been something that the American people have had to absorb. That's been tough on folks. Worsen economic conditions, limit the ability or all but eliminate the ability for most government agencies to provide for the health, the safety, the economic well-being of the American people. You know, clean water, clean energy, inspections, clean air, shutdown. You're talking about the ability to inspect food that the American people eat, shut down. Individuals who are at our border, our military, women and men, unpaid. Air travel, complicated, which of course is also an important part of our economy, but limit the ability of everyday Americans to go visit their family or their friends or take care of, you know, business, go back and forth to college, things of that nature. You know, a government shutdown will adversely impact everyday Americans in almost every facet of their lives. That is why we have to do everything possible to avoid it.
Yeah.
And I think the final point that I'd make on this, unfortunately, is that government shutdowns have been in the DNA of my Republican colleagues for the better part of the last 30 years or so. Newt Gingrich and House Republicans shut the government down twice during Bill Clinton's presidency to try to extract a ransom note of dramatically cutting Medicaid. This happened also, as you've pointed out, in 2013 under President Obama. John Boehner didn't want to shut the government down, but the Tea Party, Ted Cruz and others, forced him to shut the government down for 14 days. Why? Because they wanted President Obama, this was the ransom note, to repeal the Affordable Care Act. His signature legislative accomplishment. Imagine that, y'all. This is what the demand was. 14 days, government shut down, pain inflicted on the American people. 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
Longest government shutdown in American history, 35 days. What was the ransom note then? That they wanted the American taxpayer to waste billions of dollars to fund Trump's medieval, ineffective border wall.
Right.
Now, they shut the government down in December of 2018 into 19. But when they shut the government down in late December of 18, Donald Trump was president, Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. In other words, they shut themselves down, y'all.
Yeah.
This is how much it is in their DNA to try to extract extreme policy demands that they know they can't otherwise achieve through the normal legislative process. And all we're saying is, let's fight out on the policy playing field, you know, the contest of ideas, but it shouldn't be done by threatening the American people with a reckless government shutdown. We've never paid their ransom notes in the past. I can guarantee you, we are not paying their extreme ransom note this time.
Okay. Good. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I have a lot of questions. But thank you for being so generous with your responses. So the record of this administration is incredibly impressive, and significant legislation has passed, low unemployment, rebuilding of our relationships around the world, but somehow the messages of the Biden administration are not breaking through. Now, you've made it a cornerstone of your leadership to have message discipline, and you're a very clear communicator. What advice would you give to the Biden administration as they go out and campaign on their record?
Well, I think any president has to juggle so many things. And, our challenge, I think, traditionally as Democrats has been that we often are really focused on governing, getting important things done for the American people. But when you're focused on governing, you, of course, by necessity, are focused on the fine print.
Right.
But while you govern in fine print, and I think as Democrats going all the way back to FDR, through President Biden, we've done an incredible job. I mean, Social Security, rural electrification, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, Higher Education Act, Elementary and Secondary School Act, Affordable Care Act, and all of the Biden accomplishments from the American Rescue Plan, infrastructure, gun safety, CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act. Every single one of these things brought to you by your friendly neighborhood Democratic Party.
Yes.
That's a pretty good
It's true.
track record of accomplishment.
It's true. So why don't
But-
people know about it?
So to your point, while you govern in fine print, you message, you persuade, you communicate in headlines. And I think we've been focused on governing, but now we have to shift that focus. Continue to govern, find common ground with the other side of the aisle when possible, but to lean into the headline communication effort that is necessary so that the American people receive the accomplishments, understand that it's anchored in a vision really to put people over politics, to build a healthy economy, to make life better for everyday Americans. And I believe that shift is underway. And as we do it, I think the president will be in a strong position to make his case for a second term.
Great. Are you concerned, like many Democrats are, that a third-party candidate in the race would only harm President Biden?
Yeah, I think a third-party candidate, while everybody has a right to run, if it was a legitimate third-party candidate that just wanted to be in the contest to articulate ideas in the public domain and to battle it out and ultimately let the American people decide, that's one thing. What I think is occurring is that at least there are some forces that are trying to push third-party candidacies into the race as part of an effort to hurt President Biden and potentially to help the former president, who seems like he's going to be the Republican nominee, who has, who basically has a ceiling. And the only way to win with that ceiling potentially is for a third-party candidate to take votes away from the Democratic nominee. That's why I think it's an unfortunate, illegitimate effort. And let the two-party candidates battle it out in the arena and may the best person win. But artificial efforts to change the electoral landscape are very unfortunate, particularly in this moment of great fragility. This is a consequential election.
Yeah, it is.
About democracy, about our future, about who we will continue to be as an incredible, great, exceptional nation. And whatever the landscape is going to be, we're going to fight as hard as we can on behalf of President Biden, his re-election effort, because he does have an incredible track record. He does have a vision for the future. He's got the heart and soul and energy to continue to do what's necessary to make America the best version of herself.
Have you had any conversations with potential third-party candidates about this subject specifically?
I have not.
Oh. All right, one final question, because I know we're at time. This is a difficult time for our country. Can you share with us what gives you hope?
Well, I think what gives me hope, and we've been through very tough moments of backlash in the country, efforts to turn back the clock, while we all are going to try to bring people together and move us forward. Backlash moments around Jim Crow and in the aftermath of the civil rights movement and the Great Society, there was a big backlash in America. Certainly, I think it's fair to say there was a backlash to the progress made connected to and in direct relation with the election of President Obama. But what gives me hope is that every time America has found itself in a backlash moment, people of goodwill across the political spectrum, but people of goodwill have risen to the occasion to stand up for what is the best of America, to push back against the ugly underbelly that's trying to turn back the clock, and have emerged to make progress and to move the country forward. And I believe there are enough good people in America, certainly that's the case, on all sides of the political spectrum, who recognize the fragility of the moment, and through the turbulence, but you can't get from your point of departure to your point of destination without turbulence. Through the turbulence, we're going to be able to land this plane and keep America on our long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union.
From your mouth to God's ears. Thank you. Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Thank you. Thank you.